Thank you so much for that great overview. And if you do have questions in the audience, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I'm Dr. Kevin Magruder. I'm part of the conference planning committee, and this is a time for questions and answers, and I'll be reviewing the questions that you put into the box, and I will get to as many as possible. The first question we have is from Michelle Brown, and Dr. Gordon Nembhard, she asks, can you share more about setting up a management structure in a co-op while wanting every member's input? How are budgeting, staffing, and operating decisions made? And is it different from a typical nonprofit model in terms of that decision making?
Yes. So it probably is different from a traditional nonprofit model, assuming that nonprofit models are still relatively hierarchical, right? I know that they usually have community boards and that kind of thing. What's really important to know about a co-op and is that the purpose is to make sure, right, that while it's solving problems, it's solving economic problems in a way that reduces hierarchy and increases the voice of all the people. So that's why the member, right, it's called a membership organization. People need to feel like members, feel like they can speak up. And in fact, there's almost kind of a mandate for everyone to speak up and participate. So co-ops, the broadest management is they're supposed to have an annual meeting where every single member attends, learns about what's happening, and gets to vote for a board of directors from among themselves, right? And members, again, are the people who are using the co-op. So if it's a consumer co-op, the members are the consumers, the people in the buying club, the people who are using the grocery store who have bought a membership share. If it's a producer's co-op, then the members are the farmers who own the co-op in order to buy in bulk or to process their farm produce, that kind of thing. If they're a worker co-op, then the employees of the company are the owners. If they're a craft co-op, then the artists, the craft makers are the owners. And the purpose is to make sure that those people have a voice, get a say, get to make decisions. Now, co-ops do have a range of ways to make decisions, right? Some co-ops actually vote to hire a manager and have a relative hierarchy, right? So a manager basically makes most of the decisions and tells people what to do, but the manager is still hired by the board, which is a group of members from the co-op, right? So there's still a little bit of a difference, even if they choose that. But a lot of co-ops also choose to be even more democratic, right? And not just hire a hierarchical manager, but actually try to have more participation from the members. So some co-ops actually have everybody, as long as it's not a huge co-op, everybody's a board member, not just that you elect board members. Some co-ops have a management team, right? And the process there that I've found that I learned, the strongest co-ops are the ones that do practice as much democracy as they can, but make sure that everybody's trained well, right? So training means you get trained in how to run a good meeting, how to come to consensus, how to work as a team, how to be not relatively non-hierarchical, or how to make sure all voices are heard, that kind of thing. And so the co-ops that care about that level of democracy, if they do it well, it's because they keep training their members, they train their employees about how to operate in that kind of a way. But there is a flexibility in a co-op. You don't have to be totally non-hierarchical, but you do have to have that one member, one vote. Every member gets to have one vote for who's going to be on the board, what policies they're going to have. All that stuff gets presented to them at least once a year, if not more often, depending on how much involvement they want.
Thank you. There were several questions about the availability of slides, and I wanted to let you know that this program is being recorded and the whole recording will be posted online soon. So you'll be able to go over that at your pace, right, and look at those then.
I can also share the slides separately if we need to do that.
Okay. The next question is from Jimmy Roberts, and he asks, are there any hemp co-ops currently?
You know, I can't name them specifically, but I know, especially in New York City, that there are some that are incubating, that are starting, especially as different state laws, right, ease up about how you can use hemp and that kind of thing. So I can't give you a name of a hemp co-op, but I can tell you that I know there are some around the country. I believe Colorado, maybe California, Washington State, and New York have some, so you probably could Google them, but there is a movement to make sure, especially that Black and brown people get access to that industry, and there's a strong movement that access should be through co-op ownership.
Thank you. The next question comes from Joe Love. Are there any resources you can share for structuring a co-op?
There's actually a lot of resources online. It depends. You do have to decide what kind of co-op you want. As I said, consumer, producer, worker, or there are some hybrids now where consumers and workers or producers and workers. The places I would suggest, probably the very easiest website to learn is ed.coop, ed.coop. That's a kind of clearinghouse of all kinds of cooperative educational materials.
And is so that .org or .com or?
.coop, COOP. There's a domain called .coop for co-ops. Mm-hmm. ed.coop. That's the whole URL. Or www.ed.coop. Yeah, so it's a co-op domain. And that's kind of a clearinghouse. So you go in there and you type in a keyword like Co-op 101 or start a co-op, and then you'll see all the different websites that allow you to do that. Also, the National Cooperative Business Association, ncba.coop, has information about how to start a co-op. The U.S. Department of Ag also has a bunch of brochures online and that they mail to you about how to start a co-op. If you're interested in worker co-ops, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, their URL is usworker.coop. They also have a whole section on how to start a co-op, and they have sample bylaws, sample governance structures, etc. There's not as much information on this new kind of hybrid, which sometimes they call multi-stakeholder co-op, sometimes they call it a solidarity co-op, where two different stakeholders own the co-op. But most of those sites I told you about would still tell you about those if you're interested in that kind of hybrid. And then there is the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which specializes in Black agriculture co-op development. They have all kinds of education programs, technical assistance, and lawyers available. And their website is just federation.coop.
And then Joe had a second part to the question. Do you know of any grants available for co-ops?
That same ed.coop probably has a grant section. Also, there's a group called Seed Commons, which gives grants and loans to co-ops. I don't know what Seed Commons website is, but anyway, if you put in Seed Commons, there's also another loan fund called Shared Capital in the Midwest, and then there's another loan fund, New England Co-op Fund, Cooperative Fund of New England, which also does co-op funding for New England. So those are probably the major ones that I know of. But also some of the sites I gave you before would also tell you about how to connect starting a co-op with getting money to start up.
Great. And then Jimmy Roberts asked, are there any examples of Black co-ops combining with Native American co-ops or?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. I'm gonna rack my brain here, but I'm not sure I have an answer. Black and Indigenous. I don't know of an example. but a colleague of mine wrote a history of New Orleans and the Black presence in New Orleans. And one of his early chapters is about how Black and First Nation groups in Louisiana kind of came together, one, to resist enslavement, and two, to do economic alternatives. So he might have mentioned some co-ops, or at least collective activity that was done there. That book is called Development Drowned and Reborn by Clyde Woods. And I think it's his first or second chapter where he might talk about that. Otherwise, I guess I need to learn more about that. I think there are definitely some First Nation co-ops and co-op development going on. I know a group in Minneapolis that's developing First Nation co-ops, but I don't know if there's that connection.
Thank you. Susan Jennings asks, what inspired you to study co-ops?
Well, I'm an economist. I was interested in poverty reduction and economic development. I first actually kind of specialized in international development of newly industrializing countries. But I actually got my first real job out of grad school was with the Children's Defense Fund, looking at Black community development with the Black Community Crusade for Children. And so I was tasked there with trying to find community-based development strategies that would really be family-friendly, Black community-friendly, friendly for children. And so the more I started studying community economic development, the more I kept running into descriptions of cooperative economics and co-op development. And so then I started going to co-op conferences and talking to co-op people. And then I started talking to Black groups about they might be interested in co-ops. And everybody started giving me these blank stares. Black people don't do co-ops. And the white folks didn't know about any Black co-ops or Black history, except if we went to the South, they did know about the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. And so then people would talk a little bit about some Black ag co-ops, but definitely in the urban arena, people were saying they didn't know about any Black co-ops. And the ag co-op seemed like it was a narrow, siloed group of people who didn't see how it connected further. So I decided I'm a researcher. I should be able to find out. It made no sense to me that there weren't more Black co-ops. And so I started researching it. And so I was able to find this, much broader, stronger history of Black ag co-ops, but also food co-ops, credit unions, worker co-ops, craft co-ops. I've pretty much found examples of almost every possible kind of co-op in every possible industry. And so I just got more and more fascinated and excited about it the more I learned and the more I found out. But I really was and still am interested in using cooperatives for real community-controlled economic development in a way that really creates community prosperity, right, and eliminates poverty.
Thank you. Carmen Holmes asks, how are co-ops taxed?
Okay, it's not my specialty again, but they definitely have a special, the federal income tax code has a special bracket for cooperatives. You have to show that you're following those 7 principles of cooperatives, so that those 7 principles have to be reflected in your bylaws. And you have to qualify at the state level as a co-op. And so the problem is that all the states have different co-op incorporation laws. But if you incorporate as a co-op in your state, then the feds will recognize you as a co-op. But some states are very narrow, like they only see ag co-ops and credit unions as co-ops. Some states have very broad and very enlightened co-op incorporation. Some states you can incorporate as an LLC, which is not actually a co-op, but if you do your bylaws as a co-op bylaws, then you're an LLC, but the feds will recognize you as a co-op if you submit your co-op bylaws. And so you operate as a co-op, but your corporation is actually as an LLC. A lot of people are using that because LLCs are so much easier to create. But those of us who are like diehard co-op solidarity people, it's not our favorite method, because as an LLC, you don't always have strict rules about maintaining a co-op and how to, and if you dissolve, when you dissolve, any of the extra proceeds have to go back into the co-op movement. Like when nonprofits dissolve, the proceeds that are left over, the surplus has to go back into the charitable world, right? Well, under co-op law, if you dissolve, any surplus left has to go back into a co-op reserve. But if you're an LLC, unless you build that in specifically, you don't have that same. So it doesn't maintain the co-ops as well, but it is a way to do it. And I'm sorry if I'm giving too much information. But there are a lot of co-op lawyers out there that will help you work through whatever your state has, or find you a state that's a good place to incorporate in, that kind of thing.
Could you also let folks know what LLC stands for, in case?
Oh, I'm sorry, a limited liability corporation.
Thank you.
2 or more people can form one, or 3 or more people.
Okay. And the next question comes from Beverly Brown. Can you speak to the role Black farmers played in providing bail for those arrested during the civil rights movement in the 1960s?
Yeah, great question. I don't know a lot of the details, but what I can say is, right, Black farmers were some of the people who, right, owned land and so had a little bit of extra money, especially if they were successful farmers. And so they were able often to be the ones, right? They had land to put up for collateral, though of course they didn't really want to risk it, but right, so they had assets and they were able to put up bail. Often the co-ops also were able to do that. I actually have a colleague who wrote about not just the role of the agricultural co-ops and land ownership in the civil rights movement, but housing co-ops. He argues that a lot of the civil rights organizing and meetings happened in housing co-ops because it was safer there to talk about civil rights stuff. There was usually a common room that people had access to, and a lot of Black leaders, he says, lived in the co-op. You know, he has a whole list of all these Black leaders who actually lived in housing co-ops. So that's another interesting side of the co-ops and civil rights movement. But the other thing that I learned in my research, especially through people like Fannie Lou Hamer and John Lewis, that often Blacks were promoting co-op development because when you went to register to vote or to try to assert your civil rights, if you were a sharecropper, right, you could get evicted, right, turned off the land and then be homeless and jobless. But if you were in a co-op, or owned your own land, or owned land as part of a co-op, or lived in co-op housing or whatever, you could go register to vote or be involved in the civil rights movement, and your livelihood wasn't dependent on the whites who were trying to retaliate against you. And so there's also was a movement to try to combine, right, let's get our economic independence, our economic justice under control first, and then use that position of more stability to then fight for our political rights. So there's all these interlocking connections between civil rights and cooperative economics.
Alvin Wilkerson asks, what resources are needed to support community-based cooperative development organizations? I'm sorry, what resources are needed to support community-based cooperative development? Organizations to develop co-ops, provide education, ongoing support for co-ops, organizing, and so on.
Right. So all that stuff. I mean, I really talk about the 2 main resources I talk about are education and financing. I focus a lot on education because, as I tried to say in my presentation, the strongest co-ops have the strongest education programs from very beginning, educating the public about what a co-op is and why we would want to start one, to educating themselves about what a co-op is and how to start one and how to run one and how to sustain one and how to manage one. So the more, right, so education, if we could, you know, change our actual public education system to teach about cooperative economics and to help children to maintain their early naive notions about how to cooperate instead of beating it out of them, right? I think that goes a long way. If we could have actual co-op academies and other co-op education outside of public education, if we could start youth co-ops, so that young people already have an idea of how to run, right? Start to run their own and have an idea of what to do. By the time they're adults, they won't want to work anywhere else. So all those kinds of levels and different kinds of education are really essential. We know that when we had Black organizations that promoted co-op education, that we had more co-ops. And so we know, right, even if we can't get the public systems to do the co-op education, if we get, the more we get our Black organizations to do it, the better off we are, and the more sustainable co-ops are. So I would say, you know, we can't do this without continuous education. The money also helps. I mean, part of what co-op's purpose is to help people take meager resources and pool them so that you don't really need outside resources. But in this world, right, we live in a system that the more money you have to start a business, the better off you are. So even if you have people pooling their resources, it's good to leverage that to be able to get more. And again, sometimes you can get that through loans from these co-op loan funds that I mentioned. Sometimes you can get it from commercial banks. Sometimes we now have some cities that are doing loan funds to help support co-op development. But also some co-ops are able to leverage it from the communities. So the members, you know, everyone has to put in some equity. That's the pooled resources, but also then you can get community to donate once they see what you're trying to do and how you're doing it, and that you're going to keep money recirculating in the community. Sometimes communities and families will donate money to the co-op, and so you need finance, but the hope is that you have access to finance that won't constrain what you want to do as a co-op, as you're also leveraging whatever finance you can from among your members and community. So those are the two major things. And then I would say we also do need, you know, favorable policies, right? The states that don't have good expanded co-op laws have fewer co-ops, and it's harder for groups like Blacks to start a co-op in a state that doesn't have a good co-op law, right? So, I mean, ideally we would have a federal law, right? And you wouldn't have to go state by state, and you wouldn't have to worry about which state had what kind of law. Or at least like credit unions, you either have a federal, you can incorporate federally or statewide. So you have that choice. But with co-ops, we still don't have the federal choice. So I would say there's some policies. If we can get municipalities to put more money into co-op education and co-op financing, those kind of supports. And again, having Black organizations that are dedicated to this and promote this, I think are important.
Okay, I received a note about our time. It's 8:15 now, and we are going to go till 8:30. We've got a few more questions in line, and I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. The next one comes from Kedra, and they say, thanks for this lovely presentation. I'm in the process of transitioning my mother's childcare business into worker-owned cooperatives. I am interested in the youth co-ops you mentioned. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, great, thanks. So first of all, daycare co-ops are a really important asset in a community, right? Because we know daycare, I think it became more obvious than ever during the pandemic, right? How important daycare is, and having good, affordable daycare. Daycares are there are two different kinds of daycare co-ops. One are where the parents actually, as the consumers, own the co-op and then hire the teachers and create the co-op the way they want it. And then the other model is where the teachers, the child care providers, own the co-op as worker owners. It sounds like that's the one you're doing, but either or a combination work really well. And that's a really strong model, but that's still mostly adults, right? But you were asking also for me to talk about youth co-ops. And what I found about youth co-ops is a couple of things. One, starting as early as elementary school, there are ways to start, you know, instead of that junior achievement, teaching them how to like own their own sole proprietor business, you can get young people starting to own a little co-op on the side kind of thing. So some of them are school-based. I've seen school-based co-ops where you get students making soap and then selling it and making the soap and running the company and making the decisions as a co-op collectively. I've seen credit unions have youth branches in schools where the young people actually run the school branch of the credit union and accept the deposits and, you know, make loan decisions and that kind of thing with small amounts of money with supervision from adults, right? So there's lots of examples of that in the Black community. And then one of my favorite co-ops lasted about 15 years in LA in Crenshaw High School in LA. And this was, they started out with a school garden. I think it was a summer program at first. It was a school garden, and the students learned how to grow vegetables and stuff, and then started giving them away to the homeless. This is right 1992, right after the Rodney King, sorry for that noise, right after the Rodney King rebellions, and there was a lot of homelessness, and the students were giving the food away. Then by the fall, one of the teachers was teaching them about farmers markets. So they did that, and then they started learning about co-ops, and they realized that if they sold the produce and actually created the produce into something else, they could actually create a business. They decided to do salad dressing. They called it Food from the Hood, and they started selling salad dressing outside of the school, but they also got smart and wanted a bigger audience, and this was the beginning of Amazon. And so they actually approached Amazon and were able to sell their salad dressing through Amazon. So they had a national audience. They ran that business as a co-op. So the students made joint decisions, collective decisions. One of the joint decisions they made early on was that 50% of their profits would go into a college scholarship fund, so that anytime any one of them graduated, they could have access to some of that pooled money and afford to go to college. So they actually sent like 77 students over a 10-year period to college on college scholarships from the money they had saved from this enterprise. They did all with students deciding this on their own and running it on their own. The high school actually put in a college prep program at some point because they had a substantial number of their students interested in going on to college more than usual and able to afford it. So you can see that kind of thing. Another one of my favorites is Toxic Soil Busters. That's in Worcester, Massachusetts. They were started by a nonprofit with students who were worried about lead poisoning in the soil that their younger siblings were playing in their backyards. They joined an environmental racism group to talk about why were Black and brown children much more susceptible to lead poisoning, and started to learn about how to do lead abatement in soil. And so they started a business, Toxic Soil Busters, where they first explain lead poisoning and lead in brownfields and lead in the soil. They then go and take soil samples, send it out to a lab, and once they know how high the lead is in your yard, they give you a plan for landscaping that will plant plants that pull the lead out of the soil, and they also do raised beds landscaping. So they do a whole combination of education and lead abatement in their neighborhoods. That led them to also do skits and other kinds of ways to do popular education about environmental racism and lead poisoning. And so they also then started a video production aspect of their business in addition to the lead abatement landscaping. And again, student run as a co-op, giving the students all kinds of experiences as well as earning money and solving a community problem in a way that was supportive of all the values that they had. So I hope that gives you some idea. You know, I believe that we could be getting lots of kids solving lots of problems with co-ops. And then, you know, with that practice, their parents would get excited about co-ops. They would all learn better how to do it. And then as adults, they could really get more and more engaged in it.
Wow, those are really inspiring examples. There's a related question from Amber Twitty. Could you provide a resource or two about starting a youth co-op?
Is that a different question from that whole list of online resources that I gave? How do
If
you
those
interpret that one?
resources will have that, I'm sure that's the same.
Yeah, I think those, I mean, I can tell you, I can give you a broad outline of what to do, but you need to go to those sources, and you eventually need to get a lawyer, a co-op lawyer, but there's actually a lot of co-op lawyers around the country now who can help you finalize, right? But what I would say, the very first thing, if you want to start a co-op, there's two ways, right? One is a conversion, like we had somebody who already said she was converting her mother's daycare center to a worker co-op. So that's one thing, is to convert an existing business to a worker co-op or to a worker and consumer co-op. And that's, but you still have to do the same thing. You have to get a group of people who are interested in doing it together to talk about it, to start learning together about what is a co-op and how to become a co-op. And then to connect yourself with co-op developers who can give you the technical assistance for your specific case, what industry you're in, what kind of co-op you want, that kind of thing. So, but the very first thing, no matter who or what you are, is to get a group of people together with a common interest and talk about it and learn together. And there's lots of stuff you can do to learn together at the beginning. You can just start reading a book together. You can look at some of those resources at ed.coop and start to go through those resources together. There's lots of different co-op curricula out there. For the very beginning, easy stuff. You can start, if you're really interested in like a food co-op or something like that, or a ag co-op where you buy in bulk together, you can start with what's called a buying club, which is very simple. It's not, you don't have to incorporate as a co-op yet. You come together. My sister and I did that once in order to get some healthy food for our kids. We were not happy with what our supermarket had. And so we just got a bunch of people, about 5 or 6 people in our neighborhood together. We made a list of all the stuff everybody wanted. We saw who wanted the same kind of, organic flour and organic apples and this and that. We took orders, everybody paid up, and we bought in bulk. And then we put it all in our garage. And on the one day after it got delivered, everybody came and helped us divide it up, and everybody took their stuff home. And we did it again, another 2 weeks, that kind of thing. So buying club is a really easy way to start. And a lot of co-ops start as buying clubs and then got more formal and incorporated into an actual retail store or something like that. But you can't get around the fact that you need people to come together and talk and learn together. And as I said, that you can even do by Zoom. You can start by Zoom and then eventually, turn it into an actual co-op. Some co-ops in history, actually did the talking and the meeting together for like 1.5 years, 2 years, 3 years. So sometimes it's not going to be a fast fix. It depends, right? Who the people are, how often you get together, what the business is, et cetera. But hopefully that answered. The first thing is to come together, talk to each other, and pool resources and talk about them and learn about it together.
I think this will probably be the final question. It comes from Renee McClendon. Is there a way to do an insurance co-op for a group of entrepreneurs?
Yeah, actually, mutual insurance companies are technically co-ops. So they already, that kind of a co-op already exists, but it would still be the same idea. You all come together, you learn about the co-op model and what a co-op insurance company is like. You get a lawyer to help you put it together, but you would still be doing the same thing like a mutual aid society, like a buying club, like a co-op. You would all be putting in a certain amount. Co-ops call it membership instead of a premium or whatever, but you would still put in a regular amount to cover, you would need some people who know insurance, know how much an amount, so that you know how much reserves the company should have if they were going to help any one of you to cover your costs as an insurance company. So I don't know those kinds of details, but it's still all the same principle. If you come together, you learn about what you're trying to do, you learn that industry, and you make decisions together that will be helpful to all of you. And in this case, right, instead of the profits of the insurance company going to, outside investors, whoever owns the insurance company, you all would own the profits and get back, right? You could get back dividends, or the profits on the business would go back into your account for when and if you needed the insurance, that kind of thing.
Thank you. There were a couple of general questions. Some people asked about how they can get the information that was discussed about resources. And as we've mentioned, the recording will be posted online. It'll be posted on the Agraria YouTube channel. And there's a link that we have for that. If you subscribe to that, we'll get that link out to you so you can subscribe and you can listen to this again. There are a few questions that are still in the chat that we won't be able to get to. So we're exploring the possibility of copying those and sharing them with Dr. Gordon Nembhard if she would like to follow up with those. It's about 4 or 5 questions that are left.
Yeah, you can email them to me and I'll try to answer them. And in my answer, I'll also try to give a list of some of those resources I mentioned.
Okay. Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard, we really appreciate this very, very informative presentation, and it's the start of our conference. And so now I'm going to turn things, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Great questions. Thanks so much.